You are not overwhelmed because life is hard. You are overwhelmed because your mind never stops moving. Noise controls you. Urgency controls you. Reaction controls you. And until this changes, nothing else will. Stillness is not calm. Stillness is not weakness. Stillness is not escape. Stillness is a skill. And like any skill, it must be trained. Those who master it think clearer, act faster, and break less under pressure. Those who don't live trapped inside their own mental noise. This audiobook will teach you how to stop reacting, stop rushing, and stop leaking energy by building the rarest advantage in the modern world: inner stillness. Listen carefully. Because this skill changes everything. Stop reacting to everything. Most people believe they are in control of their lives. They are not. They believe they are making decisions. They are not. What they are actually doing is reacting. All day. Every day. A notification appears. They respond. Someone criticizes them. They defend. A plan fails. They panic. A delay happens. They complain. None of this is action. It is reflex. Reaction feels active, but it is not power. Reaction is automatic. Control is trained. That's the key. Look closely at your own behavior. How often do you pause before responding to a message? How often do you feel something first, then decide what to do next? Most people don't. They feel, then move. They feel, then speak. They feel, then act. Emotion leads. The mind follows. And the outcome is predictable. You have a choice. But you only get access to that choice if you slow the process down. Stillness is the separator. Between what happens and what you do next, there is a gap. Most people never notice it. They rush straight through. That gap is where control lives. When someone sends a message that triggers you, the reaction wants speed. It wants immediate release. It wants expression. But speed is not strength. Speed is surrender. You don't need their permission to pause. You don't need their permission to think. You don't need their permission to choose a response instead of spilling one. That's the key. Reaction is cheap. Anyone can do it. Animals do it. Children do it. Control requires training. And training always begins with interruption. The moment something happens, your job is not to fix it. Your job is not to respond. Your job is to notice. Notice the tightening in your chest. Notice the rush in your thoughts. Notice the urge to explain, justify, or attack. Do nothing yet. You are not suppressing emotion. You are creating space. It's not about denying what you feel. It's about deciding who's in charge. Most people hand leadership to their emotions without a vote. Anger speaks first. Fear grabs the wheel. Ego demands to be heard. And then they wonder why their lives feel chaotic. You have a choice. A pause of 3 seconds changes everything. A pause of 10 seconds changes outcomes. A pause of 1 minute can prevent damage that lasts years. Stillness is not passive. It is preparatory. This is where discipline begins. When criticism hits, don't rush to defend. Let it land. Let it sit. Ask yourself one question. Is there anything useful here? If yes, extract it. If no, discard it. You don't need their permission to stay silent. That's the key. When plans fall apart, don't dramatize the setback. Most problems don't require emotion. They require adjustment. Reaction says, this shouldn't be happening. Control says, this is happening. What's next? It's not about optimism. It's about orientation. Reaction looks backward. Control looks forward. When messages pile up, Stop treating everything as an emergency. Urgency is contagious. But it's rarely accurate. Just because someone wants an immediate response doesn't mean they deserve one. You don't need their permission to move at your pace. Stillness allows you to choose timing. Timing is leverage. That's the key. Here is the hard truth most people avoid. Your biggest mistakes were not caused by bad intentions. They were caused by fast reactions. Words said too early. Decisions made too quickly. Moves driven by emotion instead of clarity. You don't fix this by becoming calmer as a personality. You fix it by becoming slower by discipline. It's not about temperament. It's about training. Reaction is automatic. Control is trained. Training looks boring from the outside. Pausing. Breathing. Waiting. But boring is powerful. The strongest people you know are not expressive. They are selective. They don't react to everything because they don't need to prove anything. You don't need their permission to stay composed. You don't need their permission to think clearly under pressure. You have a choice. Every time something triggers you, ask yourself, am I reacting or am I deciding? That question alone creates space. That space is stillness. And stillness changes the entire equation. When you stop reacting to everything, your energy stabilizes. Your words become fewer but sharper. Your actions become deliberate. People notice. Not because you're louder, but because you're steady. This is the foundation. Without it, nothing else in this audiobook will work. If you can't pause, you can't focus. If you can't focus, you can't build discipline. If you can't build discipline, you stay reactive forever. You mastered the interruption. You learned to slow the moment down. You learned that reaction is automatic and control is trained. Now we move deeper. Because once you stop reacting to everything, you start hearing something new. The noise inside your own mind. Your mind is loud because you never trained it. Your mind is not broken. It is undisciplined. That distinction matters. Most people assume mental noise is a flaw. They think they are anxious by nature, restless by personality, distracted by design. That belief keeps them stuck. It's not about temperament. It's not about intelligence. It's not about circumstance. It's about training. That's the key. An untrained mind will always seek stimulation. If nothing is happening, it creates something. If things are quiet, it fills the space. Thoughts multiply. Worries stack. Scenarios spiral. Not because something is wrong, but because the mind was never taught to stay still. You have a choice. You can keep feeding the noise. Or you can start conditioning your attention. Look at your daily behavior. How often do you reach for your phone without thinking? How often do you switch tasks the moment discomfort appears? How often do you avoid silence? Those are not habits of necessity. They are habits of avoidance. Silence reveals. Noise distracts. And most people are addicted to distraction. That's the key. When the mind is not trained, it panics in stillness. It searches for input. It demands stimulation. Scrolling. Snacking. Checking. Refreshing. Not because these things matter, but because quiet feels unfamiliar. Stillness exposes the lack of control. You don't need their permission to step away from constant input. You don't need their permission to unplug. You don't need their permission to sit without entertainment. The mind resists because it has been conditioned to react, not to observe. Reaction feels productive. But it isn't. Most of what passes as thinking is repetition. Old fears. Old conversations. Old outcomes replayed again and again. That's not insight. That's mental inertia. You have a choice. You can continue letting your thoughts run unchecked. Or you can start interrupting them. Training the mind does not mean forcing silence. It means learning not to follow every thought. A thought appears. You notice it. You don't chase it. That pause is discipline. That's the key. Most people don't realize this. You are not required to respond to every thought in your head. Just because an idea appears doesn't mean it's true. Just because a fear surfaces doesn't mean it deserves attention. Just because the mind speaks doesn't mean it's in charge. It's not about suppressing thoughts. It's about changing your relationship with them. Observation over obedience. When you observe a thought, it loses momentum. When you engage it, it multiplies. That's training. Start small. 1 minute of silence. No phone. No music. No stimulation. Notice how uncomfortable it feels. That discomfort is not a problem. It's feedback. It shows you how dependent the mind has become on noise. You don't need their permission to be uncomfortable for growth. You don't need their permission to sit with your own awareness. That's the key. Most people quit here. They label the practice as not for them. They say they can't calm their mind. That's like saying you can't get strong because lifting feels heavy. Training feels difficult at first because it exposes weakness. Mental discipline is no different. Each time you notice the urge to escape silence and don't act on it, you win. Each time you catch the mind racing and gently bring it back, you win. Not through force. Through consistency. It's not about perfection. It's about repetition of effort. You have a choice. You can let your mind drag you from thought to thought. Or you can anchor it to the present. The present is quiet. The present is stable. The present doesn't shout. Noise exists in the past and the future. Regret and anticipation. Stillness lives here. That's the key. As the mind becomes trained, something shifts. Thoughts slow down. Urgency fades. Clarity increases. Not because life gets easier, but because perception sharpens. You start noticing which thoughts matter. Which emotions pass quickly. Which impulses are worth ignoring. This is power. People with trained minds don't overreact. They don't chase every urge. They don't drown in internal dialogue. They act with intention. And intention always outperforms impulse. You don't need their permission to think clearly. You don't need their permission to operate at a slower, sharper pace. Most people will never train their minds. They will stay loud internally and distracted externally. You don't have to. You have a choice. But understand this. If you never learn to sit with your thoughts, you will always be controlled by them. Mental stillness is not a luxury. It is a requirement. And once the mind quiets down, something else happens. Silence starts to reveal what you've been avoiding. Unresolved tension. Uncomfortable truths. Emotions buried under noise. That's not a failure. That's the next level. You trained your reactions. You started training your attention. Now you're ready to face what silence exposes. Silence exposes what you've been avoiding. Silence is not empty. It is revealing. When the noise stops, things surface. Thoughts you buried. Emotions you postponed. Questions you never answered. That's why most people avoid it. They say they don't have time. They say it feels uncomfortable. They say it makes them anxious. That's not the problem. The problem is exposure. Silence removes distractions. And without distractions, you can no longer hide from yourself. That's the key. Most people stay busy for one reason: avoidance. Work. Social media. Entertainment. Constant movement. Not because these things are necessary, but because they keep deeper issues out of reach. Silence takes those shields away. You have a choice. You can keep filling every moment with noise. Or you can allow stillness to show you what needs attention. Avoidance feels safe in the short term. But it compounds. Unprocessed emotions don't disappear. They wait. Ignored tension doesn't fade. It leaks into decisions, relationships, and behavior. That's why people overreact. That's why they feel constantly on edge. That's why they can't sit still. It's not weakness. It's unfinished business. Silence brings that business to the surface. That's the key. When you finally slow down, the mind doesn't congratulate you. It confronts you. Regret appears. Fear speaks up. Doubt demands attention. This is where most people retreat. They mistake discomfort for danger. They assume something is wrong. It isn't. Discomfort is information. You don't need their permission to feel uneasy. You don't need their permission to face what you've been avoiding. Growth requires contact. Silence doesn't create problems. It reveals them. And what is revealed can be addressed. What stays hidden continues to control you. You have a choice. You can run back to noise. Or you can stay present and observe. Observation weakens avoidance. When an emotion arises in silence, don't label it. Don't dramatize it. Don't push it away. Notice it. Where do you feel it? How intense is it? Does it stay, or does it change? Most emotions peak and fall if you don't interfere. That's the key. People think they need to fix their feelings. They don't. They need to stop fleeing from them. Stillness teaches tolerance. Tolerance builds resilience. When you can sit with discomfort without reacting, you gain leverage over it. Fear loses authority when it's observed. Anxiety weakens when it's allowed. Tension dissolves when it's acknowledged. Not instantly, but reliably. This is training. And training always feels demanding before it feels empowering. You don't need their permission to be honest with yourself. You don't need their permission to face reality directly. Most people avoid silence because it forces accountability. In noise, you can blame circumstances. In stillness, you see patterns. Patterns in how you think. Patterns in how you respond. Patterns in what you avoid. That awareness changes behavior. That's the key. Silence also exposes false narratives. Stories you tell yourself. Excuses you repeat. Limits you've accepted without challenge. When everything quiets down, those stories lose momentum. You start to see where you've been passive. Where you've delayed action. Where you've settled. This is not about self-criticism. It's about clarity. Clarity precedes change. You have a choice. You can keep numbing yourself with distraction. Or you can use stillness as a diagnostic tool. Silence shows you what needs work. What needs release. What needs decision. And once you see it, you can act deliberately. Avoidance keeps you reactive. Awareness restores control. That's the key. This is why stillness is uncomfortable at first. It demands maturity. It asks you to stop blaming. Stop distracting. Stop postponing. But the reward is stability. When you face what you've been avoiding, it stops chasing you. When you address unresolved tension, it stops leaking into everything else. Your reactions soften. Your focus sharpens. Your decisions improve. Not because life becomes easier, but because you're no longer divided internally. You don't need their permission to resolve your inner conflicts. You don't need their permission to grow up emotionally. Silence trains courage. The courage to stay present. The courage to feel without collapsing. The courage to confront instead of escape. Most people never develop this courage. They stay busy, loud, and restless. You don't have to. You have a choice. But understand this. If you never face what silence reveals, you will carry it into every interaction. Unresolved fear becomes aggression. Unprocessed pain becomes impatience. Avoided truth becomes stagnation. Stillness is where these patterns end. You trained your reactions. You trained your attention. Now you are training honesty. And honesty creates precision. Because once you see clearly what's inside you, you stop being ruled by it. Next, we refine that precision. Because calm is not withdrawal. Calm is accuracy. Calm is not passive, it is precise. Most people misunderstand calm. They confuse it with softness. They mistake it for hesitation. They think it means disengagement. They are wrong. Calm is not the absence of power. Calm is the concentration of power. That's the key. When someone stays composed under pressure, it isn't because they care less. It's because they see more. Reaction narrows vision. Calm expands it. In moments of stress, most people rush. They speak too fast. They decide too early. They move without clarity. That movement feels productive. It isn't. Speed without direction creates damage. You have a choice. You can let pressure dictate your behavior. Or you can slow down and operate with accuracy. Calm is not passive waiting. Calm is deliberate positioning. Look at high performers. Leaders. Negotiators. Athletes. They don't explode when pressure rises. They stabilize. Because they understand something most people don't. The calmer you are, the more options you see. That's the key. When emotions spike, attention collapses. You miss details. You misread people. You overcommit. Calm restores perception. It allows you to listen instead of react. To observe instead of interrupt. To decide instead of defend. This is not weakness. This is tactical advantage. You don't need their permission to stay calm in conflict. You don't need their permission to pause while others rush. Most people feel compelled to respond immediately because silence feels like losing. It isn't. Silence is leverage. When you don't rush to speak, the other person reveals more. When you don't rush to decide, better information surfaces. That's precision. Reaction wastes energy. Precision conserves it. You have a choice. You can discharge energy emotionally. Or you can store it and deploy it intentionally. Calm people are not emotionless. They are selective. They choose when to engage. They choose how much to reveal. They choose where to invest effort. That selectivity compounds. It's not about suppressing emotion. It's about sequencing it. Feel first. Decide second. Act last. That order changes outcomes. That's the key. Most mistakes happen because people act while their emotions are still peaking. Anger pushes words out too early. Fear rushes decisions. Excitement blinds judgment. Calm delays action just long enough for clarity to arrive. Not hours. Not days. Seconds. Those seconds matter. In business, they prevent bad deals. In relationships, they prevent unnecessary conflict. In personal discipline, they prevent regret. You don't need their permission to take those seconds. Calm sharpens timing. Timing is everything. The right move at the wrong time fails. The right words spoken too early collapse. Calm lets you wait until alignment appears. That's precision. You have a choice. You can keep equating intensity with effectiveness. Or you can learn that restraint often wins. Most people overestimate the value of force. They underestimate the value of control. Control doesn't announce itself. It doesn't rush. It doesn't flinch. It waits. This is why calm unsettles reactive people. They can't read you. They can't provoke you. They can't predict you. That unpredictability is power. You don't need their permission to be unreadable. You don't need their permission to stay grounded. Calm also improves execution. When the mind is steady, movements are cleaner. Speech is clearer. Decisions are simpler. No wasted motion. No excess explanation. Precision cuts away the unnecessary. That's the key. People who lack calm compensate with volume. More words. More justification. More emotion. Calm requires fewer inputs because it produces fewer errors. It's not about doing more. It's about doing less, better. This applies everywhere. In work, calm prevents burnout. In conflict, it prevents escalation. In training, it prevents injury. Calm protects resources. Energy. Attention. Reputation. You have a choice. You can keep leaking these resources through reaction. Or you can preserve them through control. Most people think calm will make them passive. The opposite is true. Calm makes action cleaner. When you finally move, there is no hesitation. No second guessing. No emotional residue. Action becomes decisive. That's precision. This is why stillness matters. Stillness trains calm. Calm enables precision. Precision produces results. Without stillness, calm collapses. Without calm, precision disappears. Everything builds on this foundation. You don't need their permission to slow your internal pace. You don't need their permission to operate differently. The world rewards clarity, not chaos. It rewards those who can think under pressure. Calm is thinking under pressure. That's the key. If you can stay calm, you don't need to dominate. You don't need to impress. You don't need to rush. You simply position yourself correctly and act when it counts. Most people never learn this. They stay loud internally and sloppy externally. You don't have to. You have a choice. But understand this. Calm is not automatic. It is trained. It is built through stillness. Through restraint. Through repeated refusal to react impulsively. And once calm becomes stable, something else becomes possible. You stop being controlled by urgency. You stop confusing speed with importance. You start deciding what actually deserves your energy. That's where the next discipline begins. Because calm without boundaries still gets exploited. Next, you learn to reject false urgency. Stop letting urgency dictate your life. Urgency is not truth. It is pressure. And most people live under it constantly. Messages demand replies. Deadlines feel immediate. Problems feel catastrophic. Everything feels like it needs attention now. That feeling is rarely accurate. That's the key. Urgency is often manufactured. By systems. By people. By your own untrained mind. When everything feels urgent, nothing is prioritized. You move fast but without direction. Busy but ineffective. You have a choice. You can allow urgency to control your behavior. Or you can decide what actually deserves action. Most people never make that distinction. They confuse speed with responsibility. They confuse responsiveness with value. Reaction keeps them trapped. Urgency hijacks stillness. When urgency takes over, the mind narrows. Options disappear. Mistakes multiply. That's not pressure making you better. That's pressure making you sloppy. You don't need their permission to slow down. You don't need their permission to assess before acting. That's the key. Real urgency is rare. Emergencies exist, but they are exceptions. Most urgent demands are preferences, conveniences, expectations. Someone wants an answer quickly. Someone wants reassurance. Someone wants control. Their urgency becomes your burden only if you accept it. You have a choice. Urgency thrives on emotional compliance. The moment you feel anxious, you rush. The moment you rush, you lose leverage. Stillness breaks that cycle. When a request arrives, don't move immediately. Read it. Pause. Decide. Ask one question. What happens if this waits? Often, the answer is nothing. That's the key. People rarely pressure what truly matters. They pressure what benefits them. Urgency is a negotiation tactic. When you respond instantly, you signal availability. When you pause, you signal control. Control changes dynamics. This doesn't mean ignoring responsibilities. It means sequencing them intelligently. It's not about avoidance. It's about hierarchy. Important things deserve attention. Urgent things demand reaction. These are not the same. You don't need their permission to distinguish between the two. Most burnout is not caused by workload. It's caused by constant urgency. No recovery. No reflection. No space. The nervous system stays activated. The mind stays scattered. That's not productivity. That's erosion. You have a choice. You can keep living in reaction mode. Or you can reclaim your tempo. Tempo determines quality. Fast doesn't mean effective. Slow doesn't mean weak. The right pace produces results. That's the key. Look at how urgency shows up in your life. You check messages compulsively. You interrupt focused work for minor inputs. You treat interruptions as obligations. None of that is required. Urgency survives because you reward it. Each immediate response reinforces the behavior. Each rushed decision trains others to expect speed. If you want urgency to decrease, stop feeding it. Delay responses. Batch communication. Protect blocks of uninterrupted time. These are not luxuries. They are defenses. You don't need their permission to protect your attention. Attention is finite. Urgency drains it. Stillness restores it. When you stop reacting to urgency, clarity returns. When clarity returns, priorities surface. You see what actually moves your life forward. What deserves effort? What can wait? That's control. Most people never experience this because they are afraid of consequences. They fear being seen as unresponsive. They fear disappointing others. They fear missing out. Fear keeps urgency alive. You have a choice. Disappoint others temporarily. Or disappoint yourself permanently. That's the trade. Urgency often disguises avoidance. Busy work replaces meaningful work. Motion replaces progress. Stillness exposes this. When you slow down, you notice where you've been avoiding depth. Avoiding decisions. Avoiding responsibility. That awareness sharpens discipline. That's the key. Urgency also distorts emotion. It amplifies stress. It shortens patience. It increases irritability. People under constant urgency are not intense. They are exhausted. Calm is incompatible with false urgency. You cannot be precise while rushing. You cannot think clearly while pressured. Stillness creates a buffer. That buffer allows choice. When something feels urgent, ask: is this truly time-sensitive or emotionally charged? Emotion passes. Deadlines don't. That distinction matters. You don't need their permission to make it. When urgency loses control, something else emerges. Consistency. You stop sprinting and crashing. You start pacing. Pacing sustains effort. This is where discipline stabilizes. Because discipline cannot exist under constant urgency. It requires structure. It requires rhythm. Urgency destroys both. You have a choice. Live, reactive and rushed. Or deliberate and steady. One drains you. The other builds you. That's the key. When you stop letting urgency dictate your life, you reclaim authority over your time. Time shapes outcomes. How you spend it determines what you build. And once urgency no longer controls you, a deeper form of discipline becomes possible. Not motivation. Not pressure. Consistency without stimulation. That discipline is forged in stillness. And that is where we go next. Because stillness is not just about calm. It is where real discipline is built. Stillness is where discipline is forged. Most people misunderstand discipline. They think it's intensity. They think it's motivation. They think it's pushing harder. It isn't. Discipline is steadiness under internal pressure. That's the key. Anyone can act when they feel inspired. Anyone can move when emotion is high. Discipline begins when emotion fades. When there is no excitement. No urgency. No external pressure. Just you and the choice to act anyway. You have a choice. You can wait until you feel ready. Or you can act because you decided to. Stillness exposes this moment clearly. When the noise quiets down, excuses get louder. The mind starts negotiating. It offers delay. It offers comfort. This is where discipline is tested. Not in chaos. In calm. Discipline is not built while distracted. It is built when nothing is happening. That's the key. Most people fail to build discipline because they rely on stimulation. Music. Pressure. Deadlines. Fear. These things create movement, but they don't create strength. Once the stimulus disappears, behavior collapses. That's not discipline. That's dependency. You don't need their permission to act without motivation. You don't need their permission to move without excitement. Real discipline operates without emotion. Look at your habits. How often do you wait to feel like it? How often do you postpone because conditions aren't perfect? That delay is not logic. It's avoidance. Stillness removes that excuse. In stillness, there is no distraction to hide behind. No noise to blame. No pressure to rely on. Just a simple question. Will you act, or won't you? That's the key. Discipline is a decision repeated without drama. No hype. No self-talk. No negotiation. Just execution. Most people overcomplicate this. They search for systems. They look for hacks. They wait for motivation. All of that avoids the core issue. They haven't trained themselves to act calmly. You have a choice. You can keep waiting for the right feeling. Or you can build the ability to move regardless of feeling. That ability is forged in stillness. Stillness teaches you to sit with resistance. Resistance doesn't shout. It whispers. I'll do it later. Today doesn't matter. One miss won't hurt. Stillness makes those whispers audible. And once you hear them, you can refuse them. That refusal is discipline. That's the key. Most people think discipline is aggressive. It isn't. It's quiet. It's the ability to do what you said you would do, especially when no one is watching, especially when nothing is urgent. That's where identity is built. Stillness trains patience. Patience supports consistency. Consistency creates results. Without stillness, effort becomes erratic. Strong one day. Absent the next. Discipline removes volatility. You don't need their permission to live by standards instead of moods. You don't need their permission to prioritize structure over comfort. This is not about punishment. It's about reliability. Can you rely on yourself? Stillness answers that question. When you sit in stillness and choose action anyway, something changes. You stop needing motivation. You stop depending on pressure. You stop chasing emotional momentum. You become stable. That stability compounds. That's the key. Discipline also clarifies limits. When the mind is quiet, you notice where you waste energy. Overthinking. Overplanning. Overconsuming. Discipline is not doing more. It's doing less, consistently. Stillness reveals what actually matters. Once you see that, action becomes simpler. Not easier, simpler. Fewer decisions. Fewer distractions. Fewer excuses. You act because it's time to act. You rest because it's time to rest. No guilt. No negotiation. That's discipline. You have a choice. Live reactively, driven by emotion and circumstance. Or live deliberately, guided by standards. Standards don't require motivation. They require commitment. Stillness strengthens commitment. This is why discipline feels uncomfortable at first. It removes stimulation. It removes urgency. It removes excuses. But discomfort here is productive. It builds tolerance for boredom. Tolerance for repetition. Tolerance for silence. Those tolerances separate those who build from those who burn out. That's the key. Most people quit when things become quiet. They need excitement to continue. Discipline doesn't. It thrives in repetition. Same time. Same action. Same standard. Stillness makes repetition possible. When you stop chasing novelty, consistency becomes natural. And consistency outperforms intensity every time. You don't need their permission to choose boring progress over dramatic effort. You don't need their permission to value reliability over excitement. Discipline is not impressive in the moment. It's impressive in the outcome. That outcome is built quietly. One choice at a time. One action at a time. One calm decision repeated daily. Stillness holds those repetitions together. Without stillness, discipline fractures. You act when you feel like it. You stop when resistance appears. With stillness, resistance becomes familiar and irrelevant. That's power. You have a choice. Let emotions dictate behavior. Or let standards dictate behavior. One creates chaos. The other creates structure. Structure creates freedom. And freedom requires control. Stillness trains control. Now understand this clearly. Discipline without emotional control collapses under stress. Because when pressure rises, emotion resurfaces. That's where the next skill becomes critical. You must learn to observe emotion without obeying it. That ability protects discipline when conditions are difficult. You built the foundation. You learn to act calmly. You learn to move without stimulation. Now you must learn to disengage from the voice inside your head. Because discipline fails the moment thoughts take command. Next, we address that directly. Observe the thought, don't obey it. Your thoughts are not commands. They are suggestions. Most people never learn this. They hear a thought and move immediately. They assume agreement is automatic. It isn't. That's the key. A thought appears. An emotion follows. Action happens. For most people, that sequence is unbroken. Thought equals truth. Emotion equals direction. Action equals reaction. You have a choice. You can continue obeying every thought that enters your mind. Or you can learn to observe without compliance. Observation creates distance. Distance creates control. Stillness makes that distance visible. When the mind is quiet, thoughts become noticeable. You see how often they repeat. You see how rarely they are useful. Most thoughts are noise. Old fears. Old doubts. Old narratives. They sound convincing because they're familiar. That familiarity does not make them accurate. That's the key. The untrained mind treats thoughts as instructions. The trained mind treats them as data. Data can be evaluated. Instructions demand obedience. You don't need their permission to question your own thoughts. You don't need their permission to pause before acting on them. This is not denial. It's discernment. When a thought says, "This is too hard," don't argue with it. Don't fight it. Notice it. Where did it come from? What triggered it? Does it require action? Most of the time, the answer is no. Thoughts rise and fall on their own if you don't interfere. Interference gives them power. That's the key. People think controlling the mind means forcing positivity. It doesn't. Forced positivity is still obedience. Real control is neutrality. Seeing the thought. Acknowledging it. Letting it pass. No debate. No suppression. No reaction. Just observation. You have a choice. Follow the thought into distraction. Or remain present and continue the task. This choice determines discipline. Discipline collapses when thoughts take authority. I'll start tomorrow. This doesn't matter. I deserve a break. These thoughts are not facts. They are comfort-seeking impulses disguised as logic. Observation exposes that disguise. That's the key. Stillness sharpens awareness. In stillness, you notice how thoughts attempt to steer behavior. They rush. They justify. They exaggerate. Once you see that pattern, it loses credibility. You stop identifying with every internal voice. You stop saying, "I am anxious." You start saying, "Anxiety is present." That shift is subtle. It's also decisive. Identity binds. Observation frees. You don't need their permission to separate yourself from your thoughts. Most people suffer not because of circumstances, but because they fuse with internal dialogue. They believe every criticism they think. They trust every fear they imagine. They follow every urge they feel. That fusion removes choice. Stillness restores it. You have a choice. When a thought appears, label it silently. Planning. Doubting. Complaining. Labels reduce authority. Once labeled, return attention to the task. Not aggressively. Not forcefully. Gently. That gentleness is discipline. That's the key. This practice changes everything. You stop spiraling. You stop overthinking. You stop negotiating endlessly with yourself. Action becomes simpler. You act because you decided to. Not because the mind approved. Approval is not required. You don't need their permission, including your own thoughts, to follow through. Most people wait for internal alignment. They want thoughts, emotions, and behavior to agree. That alignment is rare. Waiting for it is procrastination. Discipline moves despite internal disagreement. Observation allows that movement. That's the key. Understand this clearly. Thoughts intensify when resisted. They weaken when ignored. Not suppressed. Ignored. Suppression fights. Observation watches. Watching drains momentum. This is why stillness matters. Without stillness, thoughts blend together. They feel overwhelming. They feel urgent. With stillness, they become separate events. You see one thought end before the next begins. That separation creates relief. You don't need to eliminate thoughts. You need to stop following them. You have a choice. Every time you notice a thought and don't act on it, you strengthen control. Every time you follow one blindly, you reinforce reaction. Training happens in these moments. Small moments. Repeated often. This is how emotional discipline survives stress. Stress increases thought volume. Pressure amplifies internal chatter. Observation prevents collapse. That's the key. Most people lose control under pressure because they start believing everything they think. You're failing. This is pointless. You can't handle this. These are stress responses, not truths. If you observe them without obedience, they pass. If you obey them, behavior degrades. This skill is non-negotiable. Without it, discipline fails. With it, discipline stabilizes. You don't need their permission to stay present under mental pressure. Once thoughts lose authority, emotion follows. Emotion feeds on thought. No fuel. No fire. This brings emotional control. And emotional control is leverage. Because whoever controls emotion controls outcome. That's where we go next. You've learned to stop reacting. You've trained attention. You've faced silence. You've built calm. You've rejected false urgency. You've forged discipline. You've detached from thought. Now you apply all of it in real-world pressure. Because emotional control is not abstract. It is a competitive advantage. Emotional control is a competitive advantage. Most people think success comes from talent. Or intelligence. Or luck. It doesn't. It comes from control. Specifically, emotional control. That's the key. In high-pressure situations, skill levels converge. Knowledge equalizes. Experience overlaps. What separates outcomes is who stays composed. When emotions spike, performance drops. When emotions stabilize, precision increases. This is not theory. It is observable. Look at negotiations. Arguments. Leadership moments. The person who reacts first usually loses. You have a choice. You can let emotion dictate your behavior. Or you can regulate emotion and dictate the outcome. Most people never develop this ability. They mistake emotional expression for honesty. They confuse intensity with conviction. Intensity clouds judgment. Control clarifies it. That's the key. Emotional control does not mean emotional absence. It means emotional sequencing. You feel the emotion. You process it internally. You decide externally. Most people reverse this order. They express first. They regret later. Stillness corrects that sequence. When emotion arises, pause. Name it internally. Anger. Fear. Excitement. Naming slows escalation. Slower escalation preserves options. Options are leverage. You don't need their permission to stay composed when provoked. You don't need their permission to remain neutral when others escalate. In conflict, neutrality is destabilizing to the other person. They expect reaction. They prepare for defense. They anticipate emotion. When it doesn't arrive, they lose footing. That's control. You have a choice. Escalate emotionally and collapse leverage. Or regulate emotionally and gain it. This applies everywhere. In work, emotional control builds credibility. In relationships, it builds trust. In competition, it builds dominance. People follow those who remain steady, not those who react loudly. That's the key. Most emotional mistakes happen because people personalize events. They interpret behavior as intent. They attach meaning too quickly. they assume disrespect. Emotion flares. Response accelerates. Pause breaks personalization. Ask, is this about me, or is this about them? Most of the time, it's about them. That realization dissolves emotional charge. Stillness gives you time to reach it. You don't need their permission to detach emotionally from situations that don't deserve your energy. Energy is finite. Emotion drains it. Control preserves it. When emotional control improves, decision quality improves. You stop reacting to tone. You stop reacting to pressure. You stop reacting to expectations. You start responding to facts. Facts don't provoke. They inform. That's the key. Most people are emotionally predictable. Push here, they explode. Ignore there, they chase. Criticize this, they collapse. Predictability is vulnerability. Emotional control removes that vulnerability. When others can't predict your reaction, they lose influence. This is not manipulation. It's independence. You don't need their permission to be emotionally self-governed. Stillness is the training ground. In stillness, you practice non-reaction. You observe sensation without expression. You build tolerance. Tolerance under pressure is power. Pressure reveals training. When stakes rise, emotion rises with it. Without control, behavior deteriorates. With control, behavior sharpens. You have a choice. Allow pressure to hijack emotion. Or allow emotion to inform without commanding. That distinction defines leaders. Leaders don't suppress emotion. They regulate it. They don't deny pressure. They absorb it. Absorption requires capacity. Stillness builds capacity. That's the key. Emotional control also shortens recovery time. Reactive people stay upset longer. They replay events. They rehash conversations. Controlled people process and move on. They don't carry residue. That efficiency compounds. Less emotional drag means more available energy. More energy means better execution. You don't need their permission to stop carrying emotional weight that doesn't serve you. Most people think venting releases emotion. It often reinforces it. Expression rehearses the emotion. Observation dissolves it. Stillness teaches dissolution. Sit with the sensation. Breathe. Don't narrate. Narration fuels emotion. Silence starves it. That's the key. This skill changes how others experience you. You become steady, reliable, unshakable. People test boundaries less when reactions don't reward them. Calm discourages escalation. Control sets limits without confrontation. You have a choice. React loudly and invite conflict. Or remain composed and end it early. Most conflict continues because it's fed. Emotion is fuel. Remove fuel, fire fades. This is not avoidance. It's efficiency. Emotional control also improves self-respect. When you stop saying things you regret, confidence stabilizes. When you stop reacting impulsively, self-trust grows. You begin to rely on yourself. That reliance changes identity. You stop seeing yourself as reactive. You start seeing yourself as composed. Identity drives behavior. That's the key. Understand this clearly. Emotional control does not make you passive. It makes you dangerous in a quiet way. Because when you act, it's intentional. Because when you speak, it's precise. Because when you decide, it's final. No noise. No drama. No wasted energy. You have a choice. Let emotion lead and accept instability. Or regulate emotion and operate with advantage. Most people never make this choice consciously. You are making it now. But emotional control alone is not enough. Control must be protected from overload. And overload comes from noise. Too much input. Too much information. Too much stimulation. Even controlled emotion collapses under constant noise. So the next discipline is subtraction. Not adding more strategies. Removing interference. Because clarity doesn't come from accumulation. It comes from reduction. You don't need more information, you need less noise. You are not stuck because you lack knowledge. You are stuck because your attention is fragmented. That's the key. Most people already know what to do. They just can't hear themselves think long enough to do it. They consume. They scroll. They listen. They absorb. More podcasts. More advice. More strategies. Yet nothing changes. Because information without application is noise. You have a choice. You can keep collecting ideas. Or you can start removing interference. Noise is not just sound. It is excess input. Too many opinions. Too many updates. Too many directions pulling at once. The mind was not built for constant intake. When input exceeds capacity, clarity collapses. That's the key. Most people mistake learning for progress. They feel productive while consuming. They feel safe while preparing. But preparation becomes procrastination when it never ends. You don't need their permission to stop consuming. You don't need their permission to act on what you already know. Stillness exposes this pattern. When the noise drops, unresolved decisions surface. Tasks you've delayed become obvious. Priorities clarify. Noise hides responsibility. Silence reveals it. You have a choice. Fill every moment with input. Or leave space for execution. Execution requires quiet. You cannot act decisively while constantly processing new information. Action demands focus. Focus demands subtraction. That's the key. Look at how noise enters your life. Notifications interrupt thought. News triggers emotion. Advice competes for authority. None of this is neutral. Every input pulls attention away from intention. Attention is the bottleneck. When attention is scattered, discipline weakens. When discipline weakens, progress stalls. You don't need their permission to limit what enters your mind. Boundaries are not avoidance. They are protection. Protecting attention protects results. Stillness is not the absence of information. It is the presence of clarity. Clarity only appears when noise is reduced. You have a choice. Continue adding inputs and hoping something clicks. Or remove enough noise for action to become obvious. Most people choose accumulation because it feels safe. Reduction feels uncomfortable. It removes excuses. That's the key. Noise also feeds comparison. You see how others work. How others think. How others succeed. Comparison distorts perception. You start doubting your pace. Your path. Your decisions. Noise invites external authority. Stillness restores internal authority. When external voices quiet down, your own standards return. You don't need their permission to trust your judgment. Most people never develop judgment because they outsource it. They ask before deciding. They check before acting. They wait for validation. Noise enables that dependency. Silence breaks it. In silence, there is no one to ask. No one to compare. No one to blame. Just a simple question. What matters now? That's the key. Noise also keeps emotion unstable. Too much input keeps the nervous system activated. Alert. Reactive. Even disciplined people degrade under constant stimulation. Emotional control requires recovery. Recovery requires quiet. Stillness allows the system to reset. Without reset, even strong habits erode. You have a choice. Live in constant stimulation. Or design intentional quiet. Intentional quiet is not laziness. It is maintenance. Maintenance prevents collapse. Look at your consumption patterns. How much of what you consume changes behavior? How much just fills time? Be honest. Most content is entertainment disguised as education. It keeps you thinking, not doing. That's the key. Action doesn't require more ideas. It requires commitment. Commitment strengthens in simplicity. The fewer inputs you have, the clearer your next step becomes. Noise blurs steps. Silence sharpens them. You don't need their permission to simplify. Simplification is discipline. Choose fewer sources. Limit exposure. Create blocks without input. These are not restrictions. They are strategic decisions. Stillness creates room for implementation. Implementation builds momentum. Momentum restores confidence. Confidence reduces the urge for more input. The cycle reverses. That's the key. Most people keep searching because they don't trust themselves to act. Noise becomes reassurance. Silence demands responsibility. Responsibility is uncomfortable. But it is necessary. You have a choice. Keep seeking answers externally. Or start executing internally. Execution reveals what actually needs improvement. No amount of information replaces experience. Experience only comes from action. Action requires focus. Focus requires quiet. You don't need their permission to stop consuming. You don't need their permission to start applying. Stillness makes action unavoidable. When nothing distracts you, you see clearly what needs to be done. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. That clarity changes behavior. That's the key. Noise keeps you busy. Stillness makes you effective. Most people will stay busy forever. You don't have to. But understand this. Reducing noise is not a one-time decision. It is a discipline. Noise creeps back in if you don't guard against it. Guarding requires standards. Standards require identity. Identity is shaped by daily practice. Which brings us to the final integration. Because stillness is not a phase. It is a way of operating. It must be reinforced daily. Otherwise, the world will reclaim your attention. In the final chapter, you learn how to build a still mind that cannot be shaken. Not temporarily. Not occasionally. Permanently. Build a still mind that cannot be shaken. Stillness is not something you visit. It is something you build. That's the key. Most people treat calm as a mood. Something that appears when life cooperates. Something fragile. That is weakness disguised as peace. A still mind is not dependent on conditions. It is trained. You don't need their permission to stop waiting for the right moment. The right moment is created by discipline. Stillness is not passive. It is structural. It comes from systems, boundaries, and standards. You have a choice. Rely on motivation. Or rely on structure. Motivation fluctuates. Structure holds. That's the key. A still mind begins with predictable routines. When your day has no rhythm, your mind stays alert, scanning, reacting. Uncertainty keeps the nervous system engaged. Predictability calms it. This is not about comfort. It is about control. Fixed wake times. Fixed work blocks. Fixed recovery windows. Structure reduces decision fatigue. Fewer decisions mean less internal noise. Less noise means more clarity. You don't need their permission to design your days deliberately. Stillness grows where chaos is removed. Next, a still mind requires firm boundaries. Boundaries are not walls. They are filters. Not everything deserves access to you. Not every message deserves a response. Not every opinion deserves consideration. Without boundaries, attention leaks. When attention leaks, stillness collapses. That's the key. People who cannot say no cannot stay calm. Their minds are pulled by every demand. A still mind chooses deliberately what enters. Time boundaries. Digital boundaries. Emotional boundaries. These are not luxuries. They are prerequisites. You have a choice. React to everything. Or protect your internal state. Protection is discipline. Stillness also requires physical regulation. Your body and mind are not separate systems. Poor sleep destabilizes thought. Poor movement increases agitation. Poor breathing keeps stress elevated. A still mind lives in a regulated body. Slow breathing. Deliberate movement. Consistent rest. These are not wellness trends. They are control mechanisms. That's the key. Most people try to think their way into calm. It doesn't work. Calm is physiological before it is philosophical. Train the body, and the mind follows. You don't need their permission to prioritize physical regulation. Ignoring the body is ignoring reality. Next, a still mind requires emotional ownership. Stillness does not mean the absence of emotion. It means the absence of emotional control over behavior. Emotions will arise. They always do. The difference is response. You feel anger, but you don't obey it. You feel fear, but you don't freeze. You feel excitement, but you don't rush. You have a choice. Act from emotion. Or observe. And decide. That pause is stillness in action. That's the key. Emotional ownership comes from practice. You notice sensation without labeling it urgent. You let emotion pass without assigning meaning. This is not suppression. It is leadership. A still mind leads internal states instead of being led by them. You don't need their permission to stop explaining your emotions. You only need to manage them. Stillness also requires identity alignment. Who you believe you are determines how you respond. If you see yourself as reactive, chaos feels normal. If you see yourself as disciplined, calm becomes default. Identity is reinforced by behavior. Every time you pause instead of reacting, identity shifts. Every time you choose silence over impulse, identity strengthens. That's the key. Stillness compounds. The more you practice it, the faster it appears. Eventually, calm becomes your baseline. Noise no longer hooks you. Provocation loses power. You don't need their permission to become unshakable. Unshakable people are not lucky. They are trained. Finally, a still mind requires ongoing maintenance. Stillness is not permanent by default. It is permanent by practice. Skip the habits, and noise returns. Abandon the boundaries, and chaos seeps in. Maintenance is non-negotiable. Daily quiet. Daily reflection. Daily regulation. These are not optional once you understand the cost of neglect. That's the key. Most people wait until they are overwhelmed to seek calm. You build stillness before pressure hits. So when pressure arrives, you remain intact. You have a choice. Live reactively and recover repeatedly. Or live deliberately and remain steady. Stillness is not withdrawal from life. It is dominance over it. A still mind moves faster, sees clearer, and chooses better. It is not slow. It is precise. And precision wins. You don't need their permission to stop living in reaction. You don't need their permission to operate with control. Stillness is a skill. And like any skill, it belongs to those willing to train it. Train it daily. Protect it fiercely. Use it deliberately. Because in a world addicted to noise, the calm mind is the most dangerous weapon. That's the key. You don't need to change your personality. You don't need to escape your life. You don't need more motivation. You need control. Control over your reactions. Control over your attention. Control over the noise inside your own mind. Stillness is not something you wait for. It is something you practice. Every pause. Every moment of restraint. Every time you choose awareness over impulse. Most people will never develop this skill. They will stay reactive, distracted, and exhausted. You don't have to. Starting today, stop feeding the noise. Start training the pause. Build a mind that stays steady when everything else moves. Your challenge is simple. Practice stillness daily, especially when it's uncomfortable. Because the person who can remain still is the person who cannot be controlled.